As beings on this particular planet who have attained the state of human rebirth, this precious human body with all of the opportunity and freedom that it provides us with, we are, as it were, at a frontier or border, in that we have the choice to either use that potential to attain to higher states of rebirth and enlightenment, or we can continue to wander in the cycle of samsara, and the mind will be drawn to lower states of rebirth and further confusion and suffering. We're on that pivotal point, or that borderline right now, between up and down. Buddhahood is the attainment of such a state of enlightenment that there is omniscience, that there is the ability to be aware of and to see every aspect of reality. And so when the Buddha Shakyamuni described the different realms of existence in the cycle of rebirth, the Buddha was speaking from this state of omniscience in describing 6 basic realms of samsaric existence. 3 of these are lower states: the hells, the preta realms, or that of tormented spirits, and the animal realm. And the other 3 are relatively superior states of rebirth: the human birth and the realm of gods and demigods. Therefore, as human beings, we are enjoying a superior state of rebirth, by and large quite a favorable and superior state when compared to the others.
시와 말아 내가 쭉 좋아하시네 근데 머리 쳐봐야지 내가 랜선 봤으네 머리 쳐만 머리 나가 내가 쭉 이나요 이거 소소소소가 달라 먹게와 제주고 머리 라는 타만 파서 좋아했어 내가 소소
What kind of circumstances bring about the human rebirth? In general, we could say that on a collective level or general level, we all share a certain virtuous karma, positive karma, which is established and reinforced through the 10 kinds of virtuous activity. That in previous lifetimes this was the case, which brings us all to this particular realm as human beings. Now that is our collective karma, the karma that we share in general. However, there are also elements of negative karma in the makeup of each and every one of us, in some cases more, in some cases less. So that we can say that while we are all generally speaking human beings, and that there are many human beings in this realm, there are many different qualities of human beings, and many different ways in which human beings experience the human realm. Some of them far more favorable and positive than others. And the difference between these positive and negative states of a really fortunate human existence or a really inferior or unfortunate state of human existence all depends upon this positive and negative karmic makeup. Perhaps we could distinguish human beings on 3 levels. The most excellent kind of human existence, a mediocre kind or intermediate kind, and an inferior kind. Now this classification would be from the point of view of how much use that person is making of the human potential. There are many people who are, quite frankly, evil. They have no interest in spiritual teachings, such as the teachings of Dharma. Not only do they have no interest, sometimes they are out and out opposed to these things. They hate these kind of teachings. And their life is spent in very evil kinds of activity, which is harmful to themselves and harmful to others. Now the reason that that is an inferior kind of human birth is because all the opportunity is being wasted. The only future, the only destiny for the mind of that kind of individual is some very low state of future rebirth, in great suffering and great confusion. The mind will continue to wander in the cycle of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. There's no escape for that kind of mind, as long as that kind of activity goes on. Which means that from the point of view of spiritual development, the human existence has been wasted. It's an inferior way to live as a human being. Now, the vast majority of people live in a very mediocre way, which means that while they have this potential for attaining enlightenment in being human, they make no use of it. They're not particularly bad people, but they're not particularly good people either. They don't do anything that's really worthwhile one way or the other. And their life just passes in a mediocre way. And the result, not surprising, is mediocre. The rebirth that the mind takes is not a particularly good one, it's not a particularly bad one. Nothing can be said about it on any level at all. It's neither good nor bad, it's just mediocre, nothing has happened. Now on the other hand, there are people who realize the potential of the human birth and understand that in being human, one could, if one wanted, attain to complete enlightenment. One could achieve that enlightenment not only for oneself, but for the benefit of all beings. These are the kind of people who are motivated to spiritual teachings, such as the teachings of Dharma, who are motivated to the practice of those teachings, and they are really making the most excellent use of their human potential. That's what we mean when we say a really excellent or a really precious human birth. Someone who is aware of that potential and is making use of it. Every one of you who has come here is experiencing this most precious or most excellent kind of human existence, with all of the opportunity and freedom that affords you. This is something which is evident simply by your faith in or interest in something like the teachings of Buddha Dharma. What does it mean to be a Buddhist, to be someone who follows the teachings of Lord Buddha? What the Lord Buddha attained to and what Buddhahood signifies is the complete elimination from the mind of all of the ignorance, of all of the confusion, of all of the emotional conflict, of all of the negativity, everything that is obscuring the true nature of mind. And with the elimination of all of that, the true nature of mind can simply express itself without any limitation, without any hindering factor. And this is basically what Buddhahood is, what the goal of Buddhism is. This elimination and unfolding. Elimination of the negative and the hindering and the limiting factors in the mind, and the unfolding of what is inherently there. The incredible potential, the incredible qualities of mind. That is what the Buddha attained to, and that is what a Buddhist is striving to attain. These teachings of Buddhism are referred to by the Tibetans as the inner teachings, because we could think of our psychophysical makeup as having an outer level of the physical body and the physical world that we relate to, and an inner level, which is the mind itself. And the teachings of Buddhism focus principally on the mind within, and the discovery of that nature of that mind. Therefore, in following the teachings of Lord Buddha, one is following these inner teachings. And this is why the Tibetans refer to them in this way, the Buddhist teachings which deal on the inward level, or the inner level. Traditionally, the texts of the Buddha Dharma speak of this precious human existence as having different kinds of freedom, 8 different kinds of freedom and 10 different kinds of opportunities. It would take a rather long time at this point to go into all of these. Suffice it to say that because all of you are educated people, you can go to the texts themselves and study this in more depth. One standard work which deals with this is the Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa, which has been translated into English and no doubt into other Western languages as well. And anyone who wants to study more about the actual qualities that make up the precious human existence should look to these texts. The important point is that in having attained to this state of rebirth, one should make use of it. One needs to practice some spiritual discipline that can really help one to fulfill the human potential. And it is that practice of Dharma, then, that can only take place within the context of the precious human birth. That is most significant. That is what one really must pay attention to, and one really must do. Because it's just as the Buddhist master of India, Shantideva, said in one of his texts, when he said, having once obtained this opportunity, which is so difficult to come by, if one does not make use of it in the moment, does not make use of it while this opportunity exists, how can one ever hope to have that kind of opportunity in the future? The fact is that while we have now attained to this state of precious human existence, we cannot be guaranteed that this will always be the case in future states of rebirth. In fact, it will be something very rare. And if we don't make use of this opportunity that we have now, we may never get another chance. It may be that rare. Basically, the way in which we behave, or the way in which we act in this world, is either physically, verbally, or mentally, or some combination of these. Whether we are talking about negative actions and negative karmic tendencies being reinforced, or whether we're talking about positive actions and positive karmic tendencies, we're speaking about physical, verbal, and mental actions which reinforce those positive or negative tendencies. Now, one really important part of one's practice is a conviction in the karmic process, a real belief in the fact that there is this causality between one's actions and one's experience. The actions that one commits as the cause, leading to states of experience as the result. Once one has that kind of conviction, one has a basis for making a moral choice in one's life between what constitutes a good action, a correct action, and what constitutes a negative or harmful action. Then one has a basis to work from, so that is quite important. Understanding the karmic process gives one that key to choosing one's course of action. Speaking particularly about the practice of Buddhism as one's spiritual path, the first step in this practice is the taking of the vow of refuge, and one continues to take refuge from that point on as the foundation for one's path. It really goes without saying that this is absolutely essential, because the essence of the vow of refuge is one's faith and confidence in the three jewels, in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If one has no faith in the Buddha as a teacher, or Buddhahood as a spiritual goal in the first place, one is not going to have any confidence in the teachings that such a Buddha gave. And without that kind of faith and confidence in those teachings, without that trust, one is not going to try to practice them. And even if one does, one's not going to get very far. It's not going to benefit one very much at all. So it goes without saying that one has that faith and confidence, that trust in the three jewels as that source of blessing and benefit for one. That is what is known as the vow of refuge. However, it's entirely appropriate to have faith in Buddha, for example. One certainly couldn't hope for anything more exalted to put one's faith in, one's confidence in. to consider the different aspects of enlightenment, of enlightened being, Buddhahood, is to understand that, for example, even on the physical level, the physical form of a completely enlightened being is marked by 112 different marks of perfection, major and minor, which distinguish it from an ordinary human form or even the form of a god. The speech of a fully enlightened being is endowed with 60 qualities, which make it a vehicle for absolutely perfect spiritual communication. And the mind of such a being is endowed with 32 different qualities and aspects which distinguish it from an ordinary unenlightened being's consciousness. It is in this wealth of qualities and this wealth of potential that one puts one's faith when one says one takes refuge in Buddha. This then is the jewel of Buddha, the first of the 3 jewels. The second of these is the jewel of Dharma. And this refers to the wealth of teachings that the Buddha Shakyamuni gave from this state of omniscience and awareness of the emotional confusion of the beings that he was teaching. And in order to benefit the beings who were experiencing this incredibly complex state of confusion, the Buddha gave a very complex and very vast and profound system of teachings. Traditionally, the texts refer to 84,000 collections of teachings which were a response to the 84,000 states of emotional confusion that unenlightened beings can suffer from. It is this path of the teachings to eliminate that confusion and attain enlightenment that is the jewel of the Dharma. And so, when one takes refuge in the Dharma, one is taking refuge in that second jewel of the teachings. The third jewel is that of the Sangha, which has 2 aspects. There is an ordinary aspect of ordinary human individuals who practice the teachings and experience at least some of the truth of the teachings for themselves, and in turn act as guides and advisors for others. This is one aspect of the Sangha. The other aspect is a more exalted aspect and refers to those beings who, through their practice, attain to very high levels of realization, from the 1st to the 10th level of Bodhisattva realization, 1st to 10th Bhumi. These beings collectively are referred to as the noble or exalted Sangha. And so in taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, one is taking refuge in these spiritual principles, which is something, which is an act that opens one to a great deal of benefit, while at the same time it poses no danger or stricture at all, no difficulty at all for the person who is taking refuge. The 3 jewels then represent this source of compassion and blessing, which we could only think of as something like a maternal concern, the same way a mother is concerned for her only child. But this source of blessing and compassion extends to all beings. It is not something selective. It is simply there to be experienced. We could compare it to a hook. And all that is necessary is the opening of faith and trust in the mind of the practitioner, which is like a ring, and then the connection is made. Without that opening, without that trust, then that connection cannot be made. And so, in taking the vow of refuge and in continuing to take refuge with this attitude of faith and trust, one is making that connection. One is opening oneself to that source of blessing and benefit, which is not something that is only felt in the short term with regard to the suffering and pain and problems that one encounters in this life. It is also something which guards the mind against falling into lower states of rebirth, draws the mind towards superior states of rebirth, and ultimately to the attainment of complete enlightenment. So the benefits from a personal point of view of actually creating that opening in one's mind are really quite incredible and can be understood on a number of levels, short-term and long-term. Another aspect of taking refuge in the Three Jewels with this attitude of faith and trust is the fact that this poses no difficulty or stricture or danger to the person at all. It is not something that is explicitly or implicitly part of taking refuge, that one can no longer perform a certain kind of activity in the world. One's ordinary worldly activity or work is not something which is any concern in taking refuge. Only this faith and trust is what is the point. It is also not the case that one is denied access to other spiritual traditions or that one is expected to reject them. There are many traditions of spiritual teachings in this world, many religions. The Buddha said that all of these could be considered the activity of enlightened being, of Buddhahood, expressing itself in different circumstances for different purposes in order to meet different needs. This is something which Buddhists accept, that all religions are valid in their own context, and that there is no requirement in taking refuge to therefore deny the truth of other spiritual teachings and to say only this is right, all the rest are wrong, and to have nothing to do with them. That is not the case at all. If one has taken refuge, it is still perfectly appropriate to have faith in another religious system and even to practice another religious system, understanding that there is this identity of purpose between one religion and another. So there is no difficulty or stricture imposed upon the person at the level of taking refuge. It simply is not part of that consideration. The only thing that is whether or not this person has that faith and trust in the Three Jewels. The particular circumstances in the world at present have caused a great spread of the Buddha Dharma in countries that were traditionally not Buddhist. And we see this actually happening all over the world today. Particularly in 3 countries, the response seems to have been particularly overwhelming. In America, in France, and in Germany. There has been this response on people's parts to the teachings when the teachings have come to these countries. It's important to remember when we speak of Tibetan Buddhism that it wasn't something that some clever Tibetan Lama made up at one point and presented as Buddhism. What we're speaking about is the authentic tradition of teachings that date back to the Lord Buddha Shakyamuni in India, who appeared among human beings as the fully enlightened Nirmanakaya and spent his entire life working for the benefit of beings, presenting this vast system of teachings, both sutra and tantra traditions, in order to liberate beings from that confusion. And it is that authentic mainstream transmission of Buddhism as it first appeared in India that was received and maintained by the Tibetan people. When the teachings of Buddhism first appeared in India, Tibet was not a particularly spiritual country at all, quite the opposite. It was a very barbaric country. Barbaric in the sense that the people were very little progressed above the level of animals. An animal like an elephant or a horse or a cow knows how to eat, it knows how to drink, it knows how to sleep, it knows how to take care of its basic needs, but it doesn't think of anything beyond that. It never thinks of karma, it never thinks of previous existences and future existences, it never thinks of attaining enlightenment for the sake of all beings. It doesn't have that kind of sensitivity. Neither did the Tibetans at one point. They were more or less spiritual barbarians. Now, at a certain point, a process began of bringing these spiritual values to the Tibetan people and infusing their culture with those spiritual values. This took place over a long period of time due to the efforts of a number of individuals. Some of these were enlightened rulers and kings among the Tibetan people who are accepted as having been incarnate bodhisattvas, appearing among these beast-like people to try and spread spiritual teachings and values among them. Some of these people were Tibetans who were trained as scholars and translators and sent to India to study Buddhism there and to bring texts back. And some of the people were masters and scholars of the Indian Buddhist tradition who were invited to Tibet and who worked with these scholars and translators in a slow process of assimilation. In this way, the whole wealth of the Buddhist teachings was gradually able to be brought to Tibet and to be firmly established in the Tibetan culture, at which point Tibet became a culture with spiritual values, whereas before there had not been these. Due to these teachings coming to Tibet, individuals such as Milarepa were able to attain to complete enlightenment in a single lifetime. Milarepa was not alone in being the only one. The number of people who attained to significant states of realization and enlightenment through these teachings are truly uncountable. People also became very learned and scholarly in the various secular and spiritual sciences of the Buddhist tradition, figures such as Sakya Pandita and others. And there were teachers such as the great Tsongkhapa, Losang Drapa, people who embodied the ideal of spiritual practice from the point of view of the three yanas, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. where the Hinayana element is the discipline and control in one's personal lifestyle and one's outward actions. The Mahayana element is the inner level of motivation and altruistic concern. And the secret level of one's experience is the experience generated through tantric practice. And so in this way, the entire wealth of the Buddha's teachings was able to establish itself in the land of the Tibetan people to provide this wealth, this abundance of spiritual teachings that people could draw upon. People such as Milarepa, such as Sakya Pandita, such as the great Tsongkhapa. At a certain point in recent time, certain circumstances developed which, on the one hand, indicated a deteriorating merit for the people in the region of Tibet, which on the other hand indicated an increasing merit and sensitivity of people in the West. And due to the political circumstances and so forth that were obstacles to the spread of the teaching, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition was forced to flee from its homeland. It was forced into exile with the military occupation of Tibet. And led by such teachers as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Gyalwa Karmapa, His Holiness Dujim Rinpoche, and His Holiness Sakya Trizing Rinpoche, many lamas and incarnate teachers were able to leave Tibet and seek freedom for their spiritual practice and their teaching activities in countries such as Nepal and India, in borderlands around the Tibetan region. In order to account for the subsequent spread of the teachings of Buddhism throughout the West, one of the most significant levels that we could look upon is the karmic level. To understand that not only is there for the time being in the West, a general collective merit which results from virtuous karmic tendencies from previous lifetimes, but there is obviously some kind of karmic connection with the Buddha Dharma as well, which is manifesting again in this life, and people are coming into contact again with this connection, with the three jewels. Now as well, we cannot overlook the influence of the Christian tradition in Western society, because the Christian tradition has given truly incredible richness to Western civilization. It has imbued it with concepts such as faith, faith in God in the case of Christianity, but this quality of faith and trust as a basis for spiritual development. It has given the basis for compassion and humanitarian and altruistic motivation. It has given concepts of morality and discipline. It has given concepts of generosity and charity and so forth. So many of the fundamental values of Christianity are equally valuable to Buddhism that we're looking at in many cases, the same thing in two different forms. There is such a similarity that it seems like an identity. And this is something else that has been very helpful for the spread of Buddhism in the West, because people's minds are already open to these concepts. And finally, of course, there is the fact that the general level of education and sophistication in the West is quite high compared to other parts of the world. People in these countries in the modern West are better educated. They know more about the world they live in, and they're more intelligent and more capable of making decisions on information that they receive. So when they encounter a teaching such as Buddhism, in many cases they're quite impressed that they see something that describes in such detail the basis for the spiritual path, our point of view as unenlightened beings, the path itself, and the result to which that path leads. Not something that seems to be just a fairy story, but something that can actually be validated, something that can actually be proved in one's own experience. And this is impressive. This is something that people are intelligent enough to perceive the profundity of. And they understand that they are in contact with something really beneficial. And that is another reason that has brought them to Buddhism. During this time that we're here at the center, our main concern in the teachings that will be going on in the practice and so forth will be the phases of meditation known as shamatha and vipassana in Sanskrit, or shine and patom in Tibetan, tranquility of mind and insight into the nature of mind. And we'll be dealing as well with the Mahamudra approach and the Mahamudra experience to a certain extent. Now, it's important to understand that in any approach in spiritual practice or in meditation, any particular technique requires an understanding of the nature of mind itself to be really effective. Because it is the mind which is experiencing this process of meditation, it is this mind which is experiencing the spiritual exercise. And the more one understands about the nature of mind itself with which one is working, the more effective one's practice is going to be. If one doesn't have that basic understanding, then it's like going out and picking the leaves from other people's trees instead of cultivating one's own tree. If one takes care of the root and the trunk of the tree, then the leaves take care of themselves, and one doesn't have to go looking elsewhere for them. One's got the fundamental things solid. One has the basis. It is said that the most fundamental aspect of the Buddha's Shakyamuni's teachings is that of karma, the karmic process. But even more fundamental than that is this understanding of the nature of mind. Without that understanding of the nature of mind, it is really difficult to have any conviction that the karmic process is actually the way things work. It is very difficult to validate to oneself the truth of karma without that understanding of the nature of the mind which experiences the karma. So even on that level, this understanding is very beneficial, on a theoretical level and also on a very practical level in meditation. When we are speaking of the concept of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, the cycle of conditioned existence, we can interpret this term on several levels. There is an outer or general sense to the word samsara, which refers to this cycle of rebirth involving the various states of higher and lower rebirth, which result from positive and negative actions and positive and negative karma, and the continual process of the mind taking rebirth in one or the other of these six in a continual cycle without end. Now that's the outer aspect of samsara. There is also an inner aspect which is described in terms of 12 links, which are termed the 12 nidanas. The 12 links of interdependent causality, beginning with fundamental ignorance in the mind, which leads to karmic formations, which develops into the dualism of self and other, which develops into a sensory structure of the mind experiencing various phenomena in various ways through the senses, which of course results in contact between the mind and the perceived object, which results in a sensation, which results in an attraction or a grasping at that sensation. And the grasping results in a kind of will on the part of the mind to become, to take birth, which results in the physical birth process as a mind in a physical body, which of course entails the aging process, the dying process, and death itself, which brings the mind back to square one, back to the fundamental ignorance, which was the source of the process in the first place. So either one is looking at samsara on an outer level, or one's looking at it on this inner level of lifetime to lifetime. But in any case, one's looking at these closed circuits of conditioned existence or unenlightened existence. But the point is that regardless of the level you're talking about, it is the mind that is experiencing all of these. And so it would seem to be quite worthwhile learning something about the nature of that mind that's doing all that experiencing, that is experiencing all those different levels of samsara. All of us are in the same situation. We have this thing that we experience that we call our mind. We have this vague understanding of, oh yes, I have a mind, my mind. But we've never really looked to see what that mind is or is not, to really understand the nature of that mind and to directly experience the nature of that mind that we're all so familiar with. As long as one doesn't have that kind of understanding, then one runs into all kinds of problems. This is where the trouble starts, that lack of direct experience. Even in the case of meditation practice, if one's practicing meditation without that basic understanding, then one's meditation is going to be very limited in its ability to benefit one. It's It's like someone who's sitting in a room that's very cold and they decide they want to warm things up, so they go outside and build a fire. Well, that's fine if you're outside, but it's not going to help inside the room. You're not looking in the right place. You're not doing the right thing in the situation. Someone who doesn't have that inner realization when they're working in meditation is busy looking somewhere else for what in fact is inherent in the nature of their minds. In this text which Gampopa wrote, which has been translated into English as the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, there are 6 major headings that divide the book in the table of contents. The first of these describes what is called Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature, the nature of mind itself as the causal factor, the potential for enlightenment. In another place, in another sutra rather, the Buddha said at one point, this Tathagata Garbha, this Buddha nature, pervades each and every living thing. It is the fundamental nature of mind itself. And it is that with which one is working in meditation. It is that which is experiencing any of the states of experience that we go through. And an understanding of that Tathagata Garbha, that nature of mind itself, will be extremely helpful in any situation, whether it's formal meditation practice or any ordinary activity or experience. When we speak about mind, we're speaking about that which conceives of I when we say, I am happy, I am sad. We're speaking about that which experiences the happiness or the sadness, which experiences any thought or emotion or sensation that arises at all. We're not looking anywhere other than there for mind. But what exactly are we describing when we speak about mind itself rather than its contents, the particular thought or the particular emotion? What about the mind itself that is thinking that thought? Then we are talking about something that is essentially empty or intangible. It has no limiting characteristics at all that we can use to describe it. It has no form, it has no color, it has no shape or size or location at all. Mind itself does not behave according to those properties. And to give this a name, we say that it is essentially empty. This is the particular terminology we use. But we can't stop there and simply say mind is empty like space, because there's obviously something more going on. Mind exhibits a kind of clarity or luminosity. Not the luminosity that we think of when we think of the sunlight or moonlight or the light from an electric bulb or from a candle. Not a visual sense of luminosity. Mind is luminous or clear in the sense that it has the potential to experience anything. The fact that any thought or emotion or experience could arise in the mind and can arise in the mind is its luminosity, its luminous nature. And that isn't enough yet. We haven't completely described the nature of mind as accurately as we are able to with the limitations of language. We need to also understand that mind not only can manifest, but does manifest. It actually does manifest as awareness. Call it cognition, call it intelligence, call it awareness. There is this unobstructed or dynamic quality of mind that is its manifestation. So, when we're discussing the nature of mind itself, we speak of its essential emptiness, of its luminous nature, and of its unimpeded dynamic manifestation as awareness. And then we put that all together and put the label mind on it as a convenient term. But that's the level of our experience that we're talking about when we say mind itself, or the nature of mind. This empty, luminous, dynamic nature of mind is something which is not subject to birth and death. On that level, we're not talking about something that came into being at one point and is going to die at some other point in the future. It always has been the case that there has been this nature of mind. It always will be the case that there will be this nature of mind. In that sense of the word, we can say that mind is eternal and not impermanent. It is permanent in the sense that it has nothing to do with birth and death or change. It just does not behave according to those properties. So, with that definition of the term eternal, we could say that there is something eternal, the nature of mind. The impermanence that we experience, birth and death and change, is a superficial layer of projected appearance in the mind itself. This is not the level of the nature of mind, but of the illusory appearances and projections that the mind experiences on a more superficial level. That is where the impermanence and instability takes place. This nature of mind, this empty, clear, and unimpeded state of awareness, is what is termed Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature, the potential for enlightenment. It holds inherent within it all of the qualities of complete enlightenment. We often hear Buddhahood, complete enlightenment, described from the point of view of what are called the three kayas, or the three bodies, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. An absolute formless level of experience, a level of pure form, and a level of impermanent physical form, physical manifestation. The essential emptiness of mind, its intangibility, is the source for all of the incredible potential and inherent qualities of the Dharmakaya. The luminous nature of mind holds the key for all of the qualities of the Sambhogakaya. And the dynamic and unobstructed awareness, which is the manifestation of mind, holds all of the wealth of the Nirmanakaya level. So in the nature of mind itself, all of the qualities and aspects of total enlightenment are inherently present as part of the nature of mind.
Then sent on about the Mama and Madam so much the darkness of that smartest. So the challenge who are conscious of the Jans and the Jans and the Daji Niggins of Smartest. That's it, Daji Niggins of Smartest, and then Pasha to us and Quatamon upon it, Tati, Barton, Dying, James, and Pasha in the Chan, Madu Smartest. That's what Mark to Toronto, Pasha to our issues.
If we have this Tathagata Garbha, this Buddha nature, this empty, clear, and unimpeded nature of mind, like crystal clear water, pure water, or like the sun shining in the sky, how is it that we're not already enlightened? Why don't we know that? What are the levels of confusion that prevent us, that obscure that experience and prevent us from being enlightened? The first of these levels of confusion is one of fundamental ignorance. There simply is a lack of direct experience. The mind simply does not see itself, does not directly experience its own nature, for whatever reason. That lack of direct experience is ignorance, is unknowing. Given that that is the case, further distortions take place. Instead of there being the direct experience of the emptiness of mind, there is the distortion into something solid, a self or an ego, a subject. And because of the lack of direct experience of the luminous nature of mind, there is the projection of something other. And so the mind has this habitual tendency of experiencing self and other, subject and object, as two entirely separate and independent things, entities. This is something which has always been the case. The mind has always experienced things in this way, and still does. There is a fundamental habit, a reflex on the part of the mind to experience things in terms of self and other, as two separate things. This is another level of confusion known as dualistic clinging, known as habitual tendencies as well in the Buddhist teachings, because the mind has this habit, this habitual tendency to think in terms of I and other, self and other, subject and object. So this is the second level of confusion that we can distinguish beyond the fundamental ignorance. The further distortion into subject and object frame of reference, dualistic frame of reference. Once one already has this situation where the emptiness of mind is experienced instead as a self, as some solid subject, and the luminosity of mind is experienced as something other. Once one already has that dualistic framework, then the dynamic quality of mind, its unimpeded manifestation as awareness, expresses itself as emotional reactions on the part of the subject towards the object. This may be a pleasant experience of attraction or desire for something which is perceived as tempting or as attractive. It may be an experience of aversion or repulsion if something is seen as threatening or disgusting. And there is always a quality of stupidity or dullness as well, because the mind simply is not aware of what is really taking place. The mind is treating everything as though it actually were very real, subject, object, emotion, and failing to see that this is a fundamental distortion of what is really taking place. This empty, clear, and unimpeded nature of mind itself. So these are the primary emotions that we could distinguish: attraction, aversion, and stupidity. Now, things don't remain that simple, of course, because from attraction or attachment arises greed or avarice, grasping. From aversion arises paranoia and jealousy. And from stupidity arises pride and arrogance. So where we have 3 primary emotions, immediately there can be 6 primary or radical emotions, which can develop into even more states of complexity. In fact, the texts speak of this development of emotional complexity as, or by considering, for example, that the single pattern or syndrome of attachment can take many forms. Attachment to oneself, attachment to something else or someone else, attachment to a form, to a sound, to a smell, to a taste, to a texture. There are many different ways in which that attachment or attraction can express itself. The traditional texts speak of 21,000 kinds of attachment alone, 21,000 kinds of aversion, 21,000 aspects of stupidity, and 21,000 situations in which all 3 of these are working together in some way. There are combinations. So the figure that is arrived at is of 84,000 states of emotional confusion, which means that as unenlightened beings we are one big heap of emotional confusion. And this whole level of emotional confusion is the 3rd level of obscuration in the mind, that of emotional conflict, which clouds or obscures that direct experience of the nature of mind itself. With this emotional confusion as the causal factor, as the basis, we behave in certain ways. We act physically, verbally, and mentally. And we very often behave in very unskillful ways, physically, verbally, and mentally. We take life or steal physically. We tell lies or create injury or discord with our speech. And we create all kinds of negativity with our minds as well. These actions establish and reinforce patterns or tendencies. And this is what is called karma. These tendencies, which are established by actions, give rise to certain experiences in the future. And it is that karmic process, the cause and effect relationship between action and experience, that is or that produces the cycle of samsara. It is all those karmic tendencies working together that produce all of the experiences that we undergo as unenlightened beings in any one of the 6 realms of samsaric being. To try and understand how these different levels of confusion fit together, to try to understand how one is based on the other, we could perhaps take the example of the physical body. Suppose our torso was fundamental ignorance, and the upper arm could correspond to the 2nd level of dualistic clinging, the forearm to the level of emotional confusion, and the wrist and the hand and the fingers to the various karmic tendencies which are established because of that emotional confusion. The point of this example is that each level depends upon the other for its existence. The fact that there is one means that there is the other, supported by that other one. If we ask, how did such a wonderful mind, this empty, clear, and unimpeded nature of mind, end up with all of this stuff? At what point did this set in? We're going to find that a pretty pointless question. It's really not possible to find any point at which this started happening. It always has been happening. As long as there has been a mind, there has been this fundamental ignorance. There has been this dualistic clinging. There has been this emotional confusion. There has been this karma. There always has been all of this stuff, just as there always has been the nature of mind. That's about as clear as we're ever going to get it. The fact that as long as there is mind, there has been this ignorance. We could use an example. We could say it's like gold. As soon as you have pure gold, you have tarnish forming on the surface of the gold. It's just part of the chemical makeup of gold. That the surface of it is tarnishing immediately. The fact that there is gold means that it starts to tarnish, it starts to oxidize. Or we could think of it in a more concrete way. We could think of it by considering the case of a sense organ like the eye. Now the eyes that we're gifted with can see all kinds of things, even very fine details. And the eye can see absolutely everything except itself. And it has never been able to see itself. And is never going to be able to see itself in its present condition. The eye just does not work that way. From our point of view right now, our mind just doesn't work that way. It just does not see itself and never has seen itself. That is the situation we find ourselves in. The purpose of all of the practices, and techniques, and approaches of Buddha Dharma is to eliminate those four levels of confusion and obscuration in the mind. Fundamental ignorance, dualistic clinging, emotional confusion, and karma. With the understanding that once these four have been eliminated, the nature of mind is simply free to express itself, and the incredible potential which is inherent to mind itself will simply manifest at that point. If you clear away the clouds from the sky, the sun shines brilliantly. There's nothing in the way anymore, and it can simply express its inherent potential, its inherent quality of warmth and light without any hindrance, without any obstacle. When we speak in describing the path to enlightenment, we speak of the five paths, as a matter of fact. The path of accumulation, of application, of vision, of meditation, and of ultimate attainment. Or we speak of the 10 bodhisattva levels, what are called the 10 bhumis in Sanskrit, the 10 levels of bodhisattva realization. Now the basis for these rough rule of thumb divisions of the path into the 5 paths, into the 10 levels, and so forth, is because as much of those 4 levels of obscuration as have been removed, that much of the incredible potential of mind is free to express itself. And so there's a kind of a balance being tipped here. Balance being, well, as much of the obscurations and negativity, confusion, ignorance, and so forth in the mind as is eliminated, that much the potential of the mind is free to express itself. So there is a one-to-one correspondence here. And it's on that basis that there are distinctions made of first level, second level, third level, and so forth. There is just a slight tipping of the scale. With this understanding of the nature of one's mind, the Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature, even with a slight understanding of this, one finds that one's faith and confidence on the one hand, one's trust in the qualities of Buddhahood, of enlightened mind, increases because one realizes these are inherent in the nature of mind itself, one's own mind for that matter. That all of the omniscient awareness, all of the supreme compassion, all of the effective activity, and all of the ability to provide refuge that is inherent to Buddhahood is inherent to the nature of mind. Understanding the nature of mind gives one more confidence in that, more trust in this goal of Buddhahood. As well, understanding more about the nature of one's own mind increases one's compassion for other beings who lack that awareness, because one understands that the fundamental cause of suffering is this lack of awareness, is this lack of understanding. That is the basic mistake that each and every being is making in going about the way that that being lives. That is the basis for all of the suffering. So the more one understands about the nature of mind on that level, the more one understands about how the absence of that creates suffering, and this increases one's compassion. So through the simple act of experiencing more about the nature of one's own mind, one also automatically increases one's confidence and trust in one's spiritual goal and one's compassion for other beings. If one approaches meditation with this basic understanding of Tathagata Garbha, of the nature of mind, the Buddha nature, then one's meditation becomes more effective. The first phase of meditation is what is termed shine in Tibetan, or shamatha in Sanskrit. The term in Tibetan, shine, means tranquility and stability. First and foremost, then, the mind is able to eliminate distracting influence of thoughts and emotions so that it can rest in any given state of awareness at will. So that having been calmed, having been pacified, the mind having been freed of this disturbing influence of thoughts and emotions, this distracting influence, it is able to simply rest or to focus. That is the first stage. The second stage is what is termed Platong in Tibetan, which means deeper insight, which is termed Vipassana in Sanskrit. It means that not only is there this calmness and stability of mind, but the mind actually begins to see more deeply into its own nature. This ultimately leads, or ideally ultimately leads, to the state of experience known as Mahamudra, the supreme state of experience possible. Now, the Mahamudra approach is divided into 3 stages as well. The first of these is ground, or foundation. The second of these is path, or process. And the third of these is fruit, or result. The ground aspect of Mahamudra, the foundation, is attained when the practitioner has this first significant experience of the nature of mind on an ongoing level. Just a glimpse, but it is something that is not forgotten. It is a significant element of one's experience from that point on. Now, one maintains that experience and refines it on what is termed the path or process of Mahamudra, which is again divided, in this case, into 4 major levels with 3 subdivisions each, making a total of 12 levels of experience. These 4 levels are termed in Tibetan Tsechik, which means one-pointedness, focusing; Trudal, which means simplicity; Rochik, which means literally one flavor or one taste, because the experience is the blending of subject and object, so that there's not a difference. And the 4th level is called Gome, which means without meditation or beyond meditation. Each of these 4 levels has 3 levels of intensity. There is an initial inferior level, an intermediate level, and a very intense level of the experience, after which one proceeds to the next level of experience. So this is the traditional description of how the path of Mahamudra unfolds for the practitioner, leading ultimately to the result, the fruit or result of Mahamudra, which is complete enlightenment, this ultimate experience. This is something which is entirely possible for any of us to attain to, because we have the nature of mind itself as the working basis. We have the potential for enlightenment already. All that we are doing in the practice of shamatha, of vipassana, and of Mahamudra is actualizing that potential. If we compare this pure nature of mind, the Tathagata Garbha, this Buddha nature, this empty, clear, and unimpeded nature of awareness, if we compare this to clear water, or pure water, then the levels of confusion that we were discussing, fundamental ignorance and dualistic clinging and emotional confusion and karma, all of these are like mud that has been thrown into the water and is polluting it at the moment, clouding that transparent clarity or purity of the water so that it cannot be seen directly at the moment. What we're experiencing then is a mixture of purity and impurity, of the fundamental nature of mind and all of these overlays of confusion. This is a fairly complex subject, this whole idea of purity and impurity, and how this mixture works, how we now experience. Rather than spending any more time on it tonight, since the teaching has already gone on quite some time, perhaps we could spend the last 5 minutes or so together in silent meditation with this idea of discovering the nature of mind itself, rather than using any particular technique, of simply allowing the mind to experience its own true nature. The first Karmapa, Duzen Chempa, said at one point, if you wish the mind to rest in its natural state, then begin with the proper posture. Because there's a connection between mind and body, then a correct posture with the back held straight and so forth is quite important, especially at the beginning for developing good meditation. Just as Gampopa said, if the mind is not artificial or contrived, it is blissful. Just as if water is not agitated and clouded, it is crystal clear. So at this point, simply let the mind rest in this state of natural relaxation without any contrivance at all. There is no need for one to look for anything that is the mind, either by directing the attention outwards or inwards, but simply to let the mind rest in its own nature. If one does let the mind simply rest in its own nature, there's no doubt that one will have a significant experience of the true nature of mind. It simply is there to be discovered by letting the mind relax in that true nature. The mind at this point should not be dull or clouded or obscured as though the spark of awareness had disappeared. Because this experience is not only one which is essentially intangible or empty, but is also one which is imbued with a luminous quality or clear, transparent quality. There is this spark of awareness. The fact that this experience is one of an intangible nature, that one does not find in looking for the mind any kind of color or shape or form or size or anything tangible that can be described as mind itself. This is what is meant by saying the mind is essentially empty. Not only is there this fundamental intangibility, this emptiness to the experience, but there is also the luminosity of mind, the clear nature of mind, in that the mind could or can give rise to any experience, see any form, hear any sound, think any thought. The fact that this is the case, that there can be this experience, this potential, is the luminous clarity of the mind. From this state of awareness which is at one and the same time empty and luminous, the mind can express itself in any way, seeing form, hearing sound, thinking thought. This expression, this manifestation of mind, the ability of mind to express itself, is the unimpeded or dynamic aspect of mind. This state of awareness which is empty, which is clear, which is unimpeded, is the nature of mind itself. To give it a name, we call it the nature of mind, or we call it Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature. But the point is that this is the nature of mind itself, and as we approach this experience, at first, of course, this is just a glimpse or an inkling that we have of what is really to take place. It's as though we see something in the distance, and it looks like it's a person walking towards us, but it's so far away you can't really tell. And then as they start to get closer, you can see that it must be a person because it's just the right shape and it can't be anything else. You just start to get that first glimpse. That's more or less the level that we're working on right now. We're just getting a glimpse of what's really, what really could take place. As one develops one's meditation, and as one purifies oneself of the obscurations and the negativity that blocks this direct experience, then one can actually recognize, just as one can see the person coming towards one and say, it's so-and-so, I know who that is. At that point, one's really seen the nature of mind. That's where vatong or vipassana comes in the true sense of the word. That is real insight into the nature of mind. And then we can start talking about Mahamudra. Then we're more or less, we've put our first foot on the path of Mahamudra. As a closing note for this evening, before we conclude with the prayers to dedicate the merit of the teaching for the benefit of all beings, it's worth keeping in mind that this concept of Tathagata Garbha, of the Buddha nature, is an extremely important one, and the experience of it is an extremely important one. In one particular sutra, which is called the Sutra of Supreme Liberation, the Buddha is quoted as saying, if a follower of mine in the future has the occasion to speak to others about Tathagata, about the nature of mind that each and every being has, then all my kindness has been repaid. The Buddha said that any kindness that he had shown in demonstrating the path to enlightenment was more than repaid by someone even mentioning this to someone else. That there is this nature of mind, there is this Tathagata Garbha, or this Buddha nature, which can be discovered through the practice of Dharma. Buddhahood is the attainment of such a state of enlightenment that there is omniscience, that there is the ability to be aware of and to see every aspect of reality. And so when the Buddha Shakyamuni described the different realms of existence in the cycle of rebirth, the Buddha was speaking from this state of omniscience in describing 6 basic realms of samsaric existence. 3 of these are lower states: the hells, the preta realms, or that of tormented spirits, and the animal realm. And the other 3 are relatively superior states of rebirth: the human birth and the realm of gods and demigods. Therefore, as human beings, we are enjoying a superior state of rebirth, by and large quite a favorable and superior state when compared to the others.